Welcome to the B'nai B'rith International podcast. I'm CEO Dan Mariaschin. Thank you for tuning in today. I'm joined today by our special advisor on Latin American affairs, Adriana Camisar. On July 18, 1994, the deadliest terrorist attack in Argentina's history occurred when a suicide bomber killed 85 people and injured hundreds of others at the AMIA, the Jewish Community Center in Buenos Aires. The evidence that Iran and Hezbollah were responsible for the attack is extensive. Yet, efforts to prosecute those responsible for the bombing have been unsuccessful. And the murder of Jewish Argentinian prosecutor Alberto Nisman in 2015 added another victim to this horrific case. This summer marks the 25th anniversary of the bombing, yet justice has yet to be served for families of the victims. Adriana is here to tell us more. Thank you for joining us today from Argentina. Where were you when the attack happened, and what do you remember about that day?
Well, I remember I was 19 years old when that happened. I wasn't in Buenos Aires, so I wasn't that close to that place, but I was in Salta, my hometown. But I do remember it was a shock to me because I'm sure you remember 2 years before that attack, the Israeli embassy in Buenos Aires had also been bombed. So the feeling, the feeling that everybody had, but especially the Jewish community, was that we were not safe, I remember that it was a terrible day.
What happened with the initial investigation? Did the investigation get started right away? Because I remember, there was, some kind of march that was led by President Menem. There was a trial. I think a representative actually of B'nai B'rith in Argentina attended that trial every day. What happened with the investigation, and why were so many years wasted in that initial phase?
I know that BBI followed that case very closely. The first 3 years were a disgrace then, because the initial investigation was plagued with corruption, incompetence. I'm sure you remember that there had been several arrests of local people that had been allegedly involved in some way, most of them members of the federal police. But because of the general mishandling of the case, after 3 years, all the people that had been arrested were released, and the judge himself was impeached and later removed for attempting to bribe a witness in order to incriminate members of the federal police. So this judge actually, a few months ago, was sentenced to 6 years in prison because of this. So at the time, it was a real scandal, and everything needed to start all over again.
So why was the trail put onto the federal police? Why do you think that it led in that direction, resulting, as you say, in years wasted in terms of having a real investigation and bringing the real perpetrators to justice?
Something happened there. It was never clear with the local connection. Apparently, there was somebody that was close to then President Menem, and the judge apparently wanted him to be completely out of the case, and so he used funds from the intelligence agency to bribe one of the witnesses so that he incriminates the federal police. As it turned out, these policemen had nothing to do, and this is why they were released. It was a real scandal.
But the next step, some couple of years later, occurred under the presidency of President Nestor Kirchner.
Right.
And there was the appointment at that time of a new prosecutor. Tell us about that.
Yes. Prosecutor Alberto Nisman was designated by President Nestor Kirchner in 2005. And a special investigative unit was created by him. And he started a serious investigation for the first time because the handling of the case until then was terrible. I think that President Nestor Kirchner was reacting to international pressure. The OAS at that time, prompted the Argentine government to do something about it. And
the Organization of American States.
The Organization of American States, right. And Nestor Kirchner said, he acknowledged that the case had been a national disgrace, he said. And so he created this investigative unit and named Nisman as the special prosecutor. Nisman started a very serious investigation for the first time, and 2 years after that, in 2007, he was able to secure Interpol red alerts for several Iranians and a Lebanese citizen that had been apparently involved.
So Interpol is the international police organization, and this act of the red alerts basically were warrants for the arrest of the suspects, correct?
Exactly. What they do is that they travel to some country that is member of Interpol. These countries, supposedly, they have to do it, but they not always do it. But they have to arrest these people so that they are accessible to the Argentine justice through extradition or other legal mechanisms. I say they not always do it because we know that these suspects travel to at least 20 countries, and these countries just let them go. But this is what the Interpol red alerts are supposed to do. So Nisman secured these red alerts, but he could not go any farther because the Iranian regime never agreed to hand over the suspects to the Argentine justice system. And as I just said, other countries really did not take it seriously. For example, we know that one of them, Ahmad Bahidi, who was at the time, a few years ago, Iran's foreign minister, he traveled to Bolivia. And when Argentina made a request, to Bolivia, they just let him go. They said they expelled him, but they just let him go and didn't arrest him. So that was a real problem. And then in 2013, something very strange happened and very obscure. It was revealed that the government of President Cristina Fernandez de Kirchner, Cristina was Nestor's wife and successor. She signed an agreement with Iran to jointly investigate the bombing. And this pact had been negotiated in secret for about 2 years. This was really a surprise to everybody. And what the government said was that this was the only way to achieve justice, because the case was paralyzed, Iran was not cooperating with Argentina, and so an agreement with them was the only solution. Of course, to many people, including the majority of the Jewish community, members of the opposition, this sounded really absurd. I always say that it was like making an agreement with the Nazis to investigate the Holocaust. It sounded absurd. It sounded like something was behind this. And Nisman had not been involved in this agreement. Apparently, it was a surprise to him as well. And he probably felt that his work of so many years was under threat. So 2 years after that, in 2015, after conducting a thorough investigation, he accused the government of Cristina Kirchner of signing the agreement in order to make it easier for the Iranians to get rid of the Interpol red alerts in exchange for certain trade benefits, economic benefits. Now, a few days after making this accusation, Nisman was found dead in his apartment, a bullet to the head. And this was the day before he was going to appear before Congress to expand on his allegations and provide all the evidence he had. So as you can imagine, this was shock. Nobody knew what was going on. And unfortunately, to this day, his murder has not been resolved yet. By the way, his murder was treated initially by the government of Cristina Kirchner as a suicide, but then it was confirmed by a forensic investigation that he was indeed murdered, and he's considered today the 86th victim of this attack.
What became of that report, which he was supposed to be presenting to the Argentine Congress? Is that report is still under wraps, or do we know what's in there?
Well, actually, he made a formal complaint to the court, and that case is still open. And Cristina and other people are testifying, but it's still not resolved because he actually accused them of trying to get impunity for the Iranians at the expense of the victims of the attack. So that case is still open. Some of the judges tried to close it, but DAIA, the Jewish umbrella organization in Argentina, played a very important role because they presented evidence and they made it possible for the case to be reopened, and that case is still open. So you have that case with all the evidence that Nisman had provided that is still going on, and then you have the other case that is the investigation into his death that is still unresolved too. And then you have the AMIA case itself that is also still unresolved.
So we're 25 years we're on. Is there any hope that justice will be served in this case? I mean, we talk about it, every year, and much has been written about it. You're right. The facts, more facts are revealed as we've come through this period. We had the very distressing case of Nisman, which you've just talked about. What are the prospects that justice will be served? There's a new government in Argentina now. Are people taking a fresh look at this? Are there incentives to come to the end of this road and to bring people to justice?
What we know for sure is that the Iranian regime will never cooperate. They will never hand over the suspects to Argentina. So it's very difficult to think of a scenario where we will be able to put them on trial in Argentina, unless there is regime change in Iran. So the only hope that I can see is the so-called trial in absentia, which means that the accused can be tried in Argentina even if they don't come here and submit to the Argentine courts. The problem is that right now, Argentina's legal system, under Argentina's legal system, this is not possible. But there is a bill in Congress. It has been in Congress for about 2 years now. But this bill is supported by the government and several members of Congress. And this bill would allow trials in absentia in Argentina, particularly in cases of mass murder like this one. Now, this bill is controversial. Even members of the Jewish community, some members of the Jewish community, oppose the idea because they think that this could harm the case internationally, it could weaken the case. And some legal experts also think that the right of self-defense would not be sufficiently guaranteed. Now, I do not agree with this point of view because the bill allows the defendants to appear and request a comprehensive review of the judgment, and they have ample opportunities to defend themselves. So the right of due process would be sufficiently guaranteed. And I think that if we could get a condemnatory ruling in absence against these people, this would make it easier to maintain the Interpol red alerts because the Iranians are trying to get rid of them. And they cite the pact that they signed with Argentina as proof that Argentina actually agreed to this. So every year, the Argentine governments need to request Interpol to extend the red alerts. So I think this would give more strength to the red alerts and also to eventual extradition requests. Unfortunately, I don't think this bill will pass this year. This is an electoral year in Argentina. There are other priorities, but it is there, and I think it gives us some hope.
And how has the media been treating this case on the 25th anniversary?
Well, they are, it's not all over the media, but you can see in the papers, all the things that the Argentine government did this year, because the government decided to take this request for justice to the international scene, perhaps more than other years. Argentinian embassies all over the world are hosting commemoration events. There were also important events at the United Nations, both in New York and Geneva. I know the Organization of American States will also host a commemoration event. I think you were invited, right, in
Yes.
Washington, D.C. And then I know there was a ceremony on Capitol Hill. I mean, they are trying to make this really an international effort. And the papers, the press here has reported on this. But it's not. I mean, this bill, for example, this bill that is in Congress, only people that are knowledgeable about the case are aware of this. The general public, I don't think they know about it. This year, as every year, there will be a commemoration event in Buenos Aires, in front of the AMIA building, and the government officials always participate, diplomats.
But this represents really a change from the past, where for 24 years there was no such official commemorations.
That's true. That's an important change.
And those commemorations that had been held, and I think I even attended one or two in Buenos Aires, I think were organized by the Jewish community and not by the government. So
Exactly.
So we've no, go ahead.
I mean, the central commemoration event in Buenos Aires is still organized by the Jewish community, but all the other events around the world were organized by the government, with the help of Jewish organizations as well. But the main initiative came from the government, which is important.
We've learned that Secretary of State Mike Pompeo will be paying a visit to Buenos Aires. Could you tell us more about the visit and how that connects to the commemoration of this terrible, horrific event?
Yes, this visit is really important. He will be coming on July 19th, so the day after the main commemoration event in Buenos Aires, because he had some commitments in the U.S. But it's really important because it highlights the need to combat Iranian-sponsored terrorism. I think that the U.S. government is sending the message that it's important to remember the AMIA bombing as an example of what Iran and its proxies do around the world. Pompeo will be meeting with President Macri. He will also honor the victims of the bombing by visiting AMIA and in the company of the Argentine foreign minister. And he will also be participating in a counter-terrorism summit hosted by the Argentine foreign ministry. But what is really important is that the fact that he's coming prompted the Argentine government to finally commit to brand Hezbollah as a terrorist organization. Apparently, the government of Israel and also the U.S. government made a joint formal request to the Argentine government, and President Macri is analyzing the best way to do it, possibly through a presidential order, because if you go to Congress, it will take a long time. So everything seems to indicate that he will do that. And I know that similar requests were made to the governments of Brazil and Paraguay. And this is very important too, because as you know, then the tri-border area between Argentina, Brazil, and Paraguay, which is a lawless area, has been a lawless area for a long time, is the main source of Hezbollah financing outside of the Middle East, because they get money through drug trafficking and other criminal activities there. And there is a Pentagon report that was issued recently that confirms this. So let's hope that by branding Hezbollah a terrorist organization and by, this will help end this situation. I think that the AMIA bombing should serve as a reminder of the horrific crimes that Hezbollah and Iran perpetrate around the world with absolute impunity, and that, something needs to be done about it.
What you said is just really extremely important, because the same issue has been raised in Europe at the EU and by individual countries in Europe about naming Hezbollah a terrorist organization. And, the Europeans tried to split the difference by saying there's a military wing and a political wing, but we know that the funding, the budgets, and all that involves support for these terrorist organizations are really to the organizations themselves doesn't make any difference. They don't see any difference. So what will happen, hopefully, in Buenos Aires will serve as a very important event along the way in making it clear internationally that this organization is seen on an official basis as a terrorist organization. When I visited Buenos Aires and I go to the AMIA site and you see the names of the individuals, any time where there's a terrorist incident where you see the names of the people, and there are so many names, unfortunately, in this particular terrorist attack, it really brings home that we have two objectives here. One is pointing the finger at Hezbollah and its Iranian backer, and also the need for closure for the families of the victims. 25 years is a long time, and so we hope that when we talk about this next year, that on the 26th anniversary, we will have seen a great deal of progress in bringing those responsible to justice. And, of course, both of us and B'nai B'rith as an organization will follow these events very closely. Adriana, thank you very much for joining us today on this kind of somber moment of remembering what happened in Buenos Aires at the AMIA building 25 years ago. Well, thanks everyone for listening to our podcast. Please visit our website, bnaibrith.org, like our Facebook page, follow us on Twitter, subscribe on your smartphone through the podcast app for iPhone or through Google Play for Android. And lastly, tell a friend about us. For my guest, Adriana Camisar, I'm Dan Mariaschin. We'll talk to you next time on the B'nai B'rith International Podcast.